If you have any questions, please go ahead.
Rinpoche, I just wanted to ask a quick question about Tonglen. When you gave the instructions the other night, and also in Maine, sometimes I've heard them given with, there's kind of a recollection, or they describe it sometimes as flashing ultimate bodhicitta, either in the beginning or the end. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the differences.
Well, last night I didn't mention absolute bodhicitta because of the context. And the context was a talk about love, compassion, and bodhicitta. Therefore, in talking about bodhicitta, I was primarily talking only about relative bodhicitta. And that was the context in which I gave some instruction in the basic visualization or meditation of Tonglen. However, in Maine, I did actually explain the meditation on absolute bodhicitta. Within the 7 points of mind training, the second point is the main practice of mind training, which has 2 sections. The first being occasional meditation on absolute bodhicitta, and the second being regular meditation on relative bodhicitta. Within the first part, occasional meditation on absolute bodhicitta, there are several parts dealing with both the meditation and post-meditation practices of absolute bodhicitta, including the such statements in the root text as rest in the all basis with regard to meditation, examine the nature of unborn awareness, and with regard to post-meditation, in post-meditation, become like an illusion, and so forth.
So, so if we were doing a short session within a larger practice, say 5 minutes or 10 minutes, we would do some of the ultimate also? Would Rinpoche recommend that?
When you say short session, do you mean a 5-minute session of Tonglen?
Of Tonglen.
So if within 5 minutes of Tonglen,
yes,
would you do a bit of absolute?
Yes, which doesn't leave too much for the absolute. I just wondered if Rinpoche could.
No, if you are going to practice Tonglen briefly as part of a larger session of practice, then it's not necessary to include the meditation on absolute bodhicitta as part of it. Basically, the practice of Tonglen is done in order to increase or develop love and compassion. The meditation on absolute bodhicitta is done in order to bring a recognition of the mind's nature, or the nature of all things, Dharmata. So therefore, it is not absolutely necessary that you include the meditation on absolute bodhicitta in any short session of Tonglen.
Thank you, Rinpoche.
Rinpoche, could you please comment on the desirability of benefiting others versus the desirability of benefiting oneself? We always have this conflict sometimes, especially when we get into situations where we are very often tempted, I know I am, where it comes a choice between one's own benefit and the benefit of others. Could you comment on the desire that's inherent in that?
You mean the tendency to want to do one or the other, or the benefits of doing one or the other?
The tendency.
Tendency. I hope I understood your question. If the answer doesn't sound anything like what you're asking, then I didn't. Generally, in our outlook or view, we regard the benefiting of others or achievement for benefit of others as of much greater importance than benefiting oneself. And the reason for this is the idea of what we could call democracy. I am one person and others are many. Therefore, others are more important. While we proceed from that outlook, however, we can't act that way from the very start, because, as you indicated in your question, we have a strong habit of selfishness. If you force yourself to act altruistically when it is not sincere or genuine, then this can lead to problems, because forcing yourself to act in a way that is still unnatural to you you can come to regret these actions, which can lead to further problems. The best way to deal with this is, if you are considering engaging in an action or course of action for the benefit of others, to consider the situation carefully, to think, in this situation, is there something that I can actually do for others? And can I actually do this? Will I be able to do this successfully? If you determine that you can achieve this, then you should go ahead and do it. But if by examining the situation you determine that even though it might be successful, you would still come to regret it afterwards, or that it is unlikely that you would be successful in helping others in that way, then abstain from the action and aspire to be able to help others in that way in the future. And in that way, you can gradually cultivate altruistic action. Was that your question? Oh, okay.
Rinpoche, my question is around accumulating merit. And I have some confusion, and I think other people do as well, thinking that the idea of doing something in order to accumulate merit is kind of like a very self-serving act. And I'm sure that I have some confusion around that, so I wondered if you could clarify that.
The accumulation of merit is not necessarily self-serving. For example, the practice of prostrations or salutation is done in order to accumulate merit. In actual fact, what it is doing is exercising and therefore increasing your devotion to Dharma, your wish to practice Dharma, your faith in the three jewels, and so forth. Other activities for the accumulation of merit, such as making offerings, practicing generosity, maintaining moral discipline, and so forth, these are all things that an individual does. By doing these things, that individual does indeed accumulate merit, but through their accumulation of merit, their faith and confidence in Dharma increases, which naturally and proportionally intensifies their love, compassion, and their altruism. So while the immediate benefit is indeed for the person who accumulates the merit, finally, because that person's bodhicitta is increased, it leads to the benefit of others. In increasing bodhicitta, we need to amass the cause of its increase as well as conditions for its increase. The cause is training your mind in bodhicitta, but the conditions involve the accumulation of merit as an associated condition or supporting factor. And in that way, by providing the environment within your mind, bodhicitta increases, so therefore it need not be self-serving at all.
Rinpoche, I wonder if you could talk about the balance between working to benefit others and spending time in our own practice. I'm somebody that finds it easier to be working with other people and doing a lot of things, and harder to put in time doing the commitments that I've made that way. Could you say something about that benefit balance?
Provided that your motivation for doing so is sincere and truly altruistic, then it is of greater importance to engage in those actions that immediately and directly benefit others. Nevertheless, when this type of activity becomes prolonged, it is possible that one's motivation can degenerate, and it can start to be corrupted by concern for reputation or renown, or concern for some other kind of payback as a result of your altruistic action. At that point, it becomes necessary to practice in order to purify your mind and therefore your motivation. In general, even though you may principally emphasize beneficial action, this beneficial action will not take up every moment of your day. So therefore, in between engaging in actions beneficial to others, it is appropriate to practice. Again, the practice, like the actions, must be done, however, with a pure motivation in order to be effective.
Rinpoche, this morning you spoke of Dharma Kirti as a teacher who said that, let's see if I remember, bodhicitta cannot be cultivated initially on the basis of emptiness, but has to be...
Kirti.
Sorry?
Well, in Tibetan he's just called the Sumatran, but his actual name was Dharmakirti. However, he's not the same person who composed the books on valid cognition, if that's what you're asking.
Oh, so I got confused.
Well,
okay.
You're not to blame for it. They had the same name.
Okay. Okay, so what should I call the person who said that?
Well, go ahead. Anyway,
okay.
It's fine.
Teacher X said, bodhicitta cannot be cultivated initially on the basis of emptiness. You need to work on the basis of belief in self and other to establish the appropriate view for the practice of bodhicitta. And I found that interesting because I've read and heard teachings from other teachers who emphasize much more emptiness as the basis for the practice of Mahayana. In fact, there are teachers who say it's the only proper basis and anything else is a bit off the mark. And I'm wondering if you think there's room for both views, or if you think that view is an extreme view. Because I've found that view persuasive, but then it frightens me a little bit because it does seem so extreme. The view that says, forget, just sit down until you experience shunyata, forget the rest.
Okay.
And everything will come from that.
Oh, okay.
That view frightens me a little bit because it seems extreme, and yet it seems true in a sense. So I wonder what Rinpoche's take on that kind of teaching would be.
When Rinpoche gets enthusiastic, he talks faster and faster and faster. Usually the first day it's very slow, and then the second day it's... The context for that statement, and I'll just give his name in Tibetan to avoid confusion, Lord Serlingpa, which just means he was from Sumatra, but anyway, Serlingpa, was that he was talking about the training of a beginner, someone who's trying to enter into the Mahayana cultivation of bodhicitta. And in the beginning, the greatest priority, what we need to establish, is these three states of mind or attitudes: love, compassion, and bodhicitta. The only way we can accomplish these as a beginner is to base them on the common assumption that I exist and others exist, which is common to our experience and is therefore a relative truth. Based on that assumption, without necessarily questioning that assumption so much at the beginning, you succeed in cultivating relative bodhicitta. However, relative bodhicitta alone, as beneficial as it is not sufficient in order to achieve a perfect liberation. In order to achieve a perfect state of awakening, you have to achieve perfect abandonment and perfect realization. Perfect abandonment means the abandonment of all mental afflictions, the root of which is the fixation on or the false imputation of a self of persons and self of things. So in order to abandon that, you must realize emptiness or shunyata. Now, although an attempt to realize emptiness in the beginning might threaten the beginner's development of bodhicitta, it is not the case that the actual realization of emptiness at a later stage of the path will harm that person's relative bodhicitta. Because when in even placement or in meditation the practitioner encounters only the emptiness, in post-meditation appearances are experienced, but because of the realization of emptiness, they're experienced without fixation on their reality, so they are experienced as being like magical illusions. Therefore, the continuous or continued presence of appearances, albeit as magical illusions, remains the context for that person's continued development of relative bodhicitta. So when you are used to the development of relative bodhicitta, you do not merely continue to develop that, but you also have to sometimes cultivate absolute bodhicitta in order to have all of the factors necessary for full awakening. Nevertheless, the cultivation of these two does not form a contradiction, because through the recognition of absolute bodhicitta, when you encounter appearances, you experience them as interdependent and not independently existent. And now we'll conclude with the dedication.
Sebe